All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Chris Brennan, and this is your year ahead horoscope for Scorpio and Scorpio rising for the entire year of 2023. So, this year I'm live streaming my horoscopes in order to get them out before the end of the year, since I know a lot of people are interested in what some of the major planetary transits are over the course of the next 12 months. So, let's go ahead and dive right into it. My horoscopes are primarily designed to be read or watched, I should say, from the perspective of your rising sign, although you can also watch them from the perspective of your sun sign, especially if you're born during the day, or your moon sign, especially if you're born at night. All right, so here's the planetary movements calendar that shows where the planets will start at the beginning of the year and how far through the signs of the zodiac they'll get by the end of the year. And here are some of the major transits and dates that I'm going to be talking about during the course of this forecast for those watching the video version. All right, so let's get into the very first transit right at the top of the year, which is the continuation and completion of the Mars retrograde period that really started way back in August when Mars first moved into Gemini and moved into your 8th house, which represents other people's money. It can sometimes relate to things like inheritance or other issues surrounding mortality or just the finances of a partner. So this is your 8th house up here in Gemini. Mars can be kind of a contentious planet that can indicate conflict, tension, or strife in whatever area of the chart that it transits. So for some of you, this may have indicated a period in which there could have been greater conflict surrounded shared resources with a partner, whether that's a business partner or a romantic partner. Sometimes the 8th house also pertains to debt, taxes, loans, or just the general topic of other people's finances in general and the role that that plays in your life. So the transit began way back in August, as I said, but that was kind of just the initial buildup phase. And there was a intensification of this transit at the end of October, starting October 30th, 2022, when Mars slowed down and stationed retrograde and began moving backwards. So the next important turning point is going to take place around January 12th when Mars stations direct in this spot in your chart and starts moving forward again, at which point there should be some rectification of some of the issues that arose earlier when Mars stationed retrograde, so that you can start moving forward again instead of having to go back and deal with contentions about past issues regarding finances from either months or years earlier, since retrogrades, especially when a planet's going retrograde, often indicate issues coming back from the past, because the planet itself is literally retracing its steps through the signs of the zodiac. So the transit's going to be over eventually by, looks like the 25th of March, when Mars eventually departs from Gemini and moves into the sign of Cancer. So this is going to be a transit that'll sort of be lingering for the first 3 months of the year, which is why I wanted to mention it right at the top. So moving forward, the next transit I want to talk about is that the slower moving outer planet, Saturn, is wrapping up a 3-year long transit through your 4th house of home and family and living situation. And it's going to depart from that sector of your chart in March and move into your 5th house of children, recreation, and it can also be the house of romance. So the 4th house transit's been kind of a heavy influence when it comes to your home and living situation and also your parents over the course of the past 3 years. And Saturn can indicate a period of constriction or a period of greater responsibility in that area of your life with respect to either one or both of those topics. So the good news is that with Saturn departing from your 4th house, it's going to kind of lift that sort of cloud or that feeling of having a greater burden or having things move much more slowly and be much more heavy in that area of your life as they have been over the course of the past 3 years since Saturn first moved into Aquarius in March of 2020. So when Saturn moves into Pisces, it's going to be moving into your 5th house. And as I said, the 5th house has to do with especially the topic of children, whether it's your own children or just the role that children play in your life in general. It can also indicate creativity or how you create things in the world in general, especially if you're a creative person. The fifth house also pertains to pleasure and joy, like what we do for enjoyment or for like recreation, like playing games. And the fifth house can also pertain to sex and the general topic of sexuality in general. So when Saturn moves into this sector of your chart, it is going to bring a greater sense of responsibility and heaviness surrounding some of those topics. So you may find yourself having more serious thinking about the topic of children for some reason in your life, whether you're deciding to have children or whether your children, if you already have some, are entering into some sort of new and important chapter in their life where they're aging and sort of growing up. Sometimes there can be issues where Saturn can indicate a feeling of coldness or distance, so that you may find that there's a little bit of tension or some challenges that come up in your relationship with them at this time. That doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, but sometimes, especially for those of you with day charts, it may just indicate a surmountable difficulty that comes up and you have to address something, but then you're eventually able to overcome it and get through it and come out stronger as a result. So there may be some similar issues with just surmountable difficulties that arise when it comes to those other topics I mentioned, such as creativity, how you find joy and fun and leisurely activities in your life, as well as just general topics of sex and sexuality, having a more heavy tone during this time period as well. So as soon as Saturn moves in March of 2023, that'll be the start of the transit, and it'll be there for the rest of the year. And indeed, this is actually the beginning of a longer term 2 or 3 year transit before Saturn departs from Pisces in 2026. So pay attention to any developments that start to take place in this area of your life over the course of 2023, because even if they look small or insignificant at first, they may develop into much more important long-term themes over the course of the next 2 to 3 years. All right, so moving ahead, other transits you have going on this year is that Pluto is going to dip into Aquarius for just a few months between March and June, and that's your fourth house of home and living situation. That could bring some much more intense transformational events when it comes to either your home and living situation or your relationship with your parents for some reason, since that's your fourth house. That's part of a much more long-term transit over the next 20 years, though, so that may not be relevant to all of you right away unless it's hitting important personal planets in your chart in the early degrees of the fixed signs. Something I wanted to focus on more is the Jupiter transits that are taking place this year, starting with a Jupiter transit into Aries, which is your sixth house of health and work. So Jupiter moving into this sector should indicate a period of growth and expansion when it comes to either health issues and just how you're dealing with your health and your physical vitality, and opening up some new vistas in terms of improving your health and finding ways to maintain good health habits, as well as to combat any pre-existing health issues that may have come up in the past. So Jupiter, especially for those of you with day charts, can be very helpful if you've been struggling with something up to this point, with potentially finding a way to address it in a way that's much more effective than things that you've found in the past. In other instances, Jupiter transits through the sixth can just indicate positive circumstances at work or with either people that work for you if you find yourself in a superior role where you have subordinates, or alternatively just in your workplace in general, having a lighter vibe that's a little bit more positive during the course of the early part of this year. So this transit's going to last all the way from December of 2022 until about the middle of May of 2023, before Jupiter eventually departs from Aries and moves into the sign of Taurus and into your seventh house of relationships. So the seventh house represents partnership, relationships, the marriage partner if you're married, as well as just the general concept of close one-on-one relationships with other people in general in your life. So generally speaking, this transit of Jupiter through the seventh house is a pretty good period for growth and expansion when it comes to relationships. So sometimes people start new relationships during this time that go relatively well. Other times, if you're already in a relationship, it can be a period of moving into a new chapter of that relationship that's much more positive and much more supportive than the previous period had been up to that point. So this is going to be tied in a little bit with some eclipses that are taking place in your seventh house and that have been taking place in your seventh house that indicate major beginnings and major endings in this area over the course of the past year. So we'll actually come back to and circle around to that here in just a little bit. The next positive transit that I wanted to mention is there's going to be a Venus retrograde this year in the sign of Leo, which is your 10th house of career, reputation, and overall life direction. So this is actually a pretty positive transit, especially for those of you with night charts, because a Venus retrograde can sometimes indicate a period in which you're able to build contacts with people that end up helping to further your life's work or in order to help you in terms of your career. So Venus is very good at building social contacts with people, and sometimes when Venus goes retrograde, it can bring old people back into your life from the past who can end up helping you in the present or in the future. In this context, it should be within the context of your career and overall life direction. So keep an eye out for the potential for opportunities later this summer when Venus goes retrograde in your 10th house. Let me give some dates for that. So this transit's first going to start as soon as Venus goes into Leo on June 5th, but then it's really going to intensify when Venus slows down and stations retrograde around July 22nd. Then it's going to be retrograde for 40 days and 40 nights until it eventually stations direct on September 3rd. And then eventually the transit is going to be over when Venus departs from Leo in early October. So that's going to be one of the most notable transits of the year. It should be very good in terms of positive events for your reputation and social standing in general. Venus can sometimes be about like winning awards or receiving accolades or recognition for some action that you've taken. It can also just be positive if you're a creative individual for doing creative activities within the context of your career that end up being successful or fortuitous. And generally just having windfalls career-wise would be a pretty positive manifestation of that transit, of a benefic transit through the 10th house, especially for those of you that were born at night, where Venus is more benefic. All right, so let's transition then into the final major transits that I wanted to talk about, which are the eclipses that are taking place this year, where we're going to have a shift occurring of the eclipses moving from your 1st and 7th house and starting to move into your 6th house and 12th house axis. So the first two sets of eclipses are going to take place in April and May, and it's going to start with a eclipse in your 6th house of health and work, which combined with that Jupiter transit through your 6th house should expand on some of the themes I was talking about earlier of new developments and major beginnings when it comes to either your workplace or where it comes to your health and improving your overall health and physical vitality. The second part of that eclipse is going to take place in the sign of Scorpio in your 1st house of self, and that eclipse is going to take place on May 5th. So I think that again emphasizes the physical vitality sort of indications that are already showing up around this time in terms of having a greater focus on your body and physical vitality and doing things in order to improve and maintain that. This is also going to be connected with some longer term themes of putting the focus on yourself and what it takes to basically put your own needs first above those of others, because you've been having a series of eclipses between your 1st house of self and your 7th house of relationships over the course of the past year since all of 2022, and even I think the later part of 2021 is when those eclipses in your 7th house started. So this can indicate major beginnings and major endings when it comes to relationships or your focus on yourself. And usually what happens is that people kind of teeter-totter back and forth between either focusing on themselves or focusing on their relationships, and sometimes putting too much emphasis on one area or the other over the course of a couple of years, until eventually by the end of those eclipse transits, they start to find a balance between the two. So with that Scorpio eclipse in May, I think this is the getting towards the end of that eclipse series. So it's getting to the point where you should start finding the balance between self versus relationships, and finding a healthy balance between those two areas of your life. So this eclipse series continues into the fall, where we get a solar eclipse in the sign of Libra in your 12th house, and then we get a lunar eclipse in the sign of Taurus in your 7th house of relationships. So this is going to be the completion of the Taurus eclipse series. So it's either going to be indicating major beginnings or major endings when it comes to relationships with the Taurus eclipse, but because Jupiter is going to be transiting through your 7th house at the same time by that time, I think this is probably going to be positive manifestations in terms of major beginnings in relationships, or entering into some major new chapter of your life with respect to relationships that's relatively enjoyable and optimistic. And then the other eclipse is taking place in your 12th house, which can have to do with themes of focusing on both physical and mental health, and what it means to, or what it takes to maintain those things. So sometimes people can go through kind of an introspective period of looking within. Sometimes they can have the experience of needing to develop, or at least have a period of greater isolation during those times. But ultimately, this sort of internal process ends up being positive and ends up being growth oriented once you come out the other side of it. And I think that's connected with some of the 6th and 1st house transits that you're going to be experiencing earlier in the year. This will probably end up being part of a long-term process, because the eclipses are moving from Scorpio and Taurus into Aries and Libra. So it's something that you're going to experience as continuing into 2024. The activation of your 6th house of health and work, and the activation of the 12th house at the same time. So any of those themes should just be getting going in 2023, but then really picking up as you move into 2024. All right, so those are, I think, all of the major transits that I wanted to focus on in this forecast for Scorpio for 2023. To summarize, some of the main areas of life, or some of the main keywords that I think are going to be the greatest focus for you in 2023, are going to be shared resources and other people's money due to that Mars transit in your 8th house. The topic of children and creativity because of the Saturn transits and the seriousness of that in your 5th house. Topics related to health and physical vitality due to some of the 6th house transits, then especially relationships and partnership due to the 7th house transits, and finally a greater focus on self and self-identity, and identifying who you are and what you want to accomplish in life and how you want to present yourself to the world due to some of those 1st house eclipses that are going to take place in the sign of Scorpio. So that's actually it for this forecast, and I think that's all I have to say. So thanks everyone for joining me in the live chat today as I live stream this. I'm doing this to get warmed up for the major year ahead forecast that we're going to do in the context of mundane astrology on December 16th. So if you'd like to join us for the live recording of that through Zoom, you can join our page on Patreon and get access to that when we go live that day. So thanks everyone for watching. I'm going to run the credits now and then answer some questions in the live chat before I wrap up. But otherwise, good luck in 2023, and I'll see you again next year in 2024. Special thanks to all the patrons that helped to support the production of this episode of the podcast through our page on patreon.com. In particular, shout out to the patrons on our producers tier, including Thomas Miller, Catherine Conroy, Christy Moe, Ariana Amour, Mandy Ray, Angelique Nambo, Issa Sabah, Jake Otero, Mimi Stargazer, and Jean-Marie Kaplan. If you appreciate the work I'm doing here on the podcast and you'd like to find a way to support it, then please consider becoming a patron through our page on patreon.com. In exchange, you can get access to bonus content that's only available to patrons of the podcast, such as early access to new episodes, the ability to attend the live recording of the monthly forecast episodes, our monthly Auspicious Elections podcast, or another exclusive podcast series called the Casual Astrology Podcast, or you can even get your name listed in the credits at the end of each episode. For more information, visit patreon.com/astrologypodcast. If you're looking to get an astrological consultation, we have a list of recommended astrologers at theastrologypodcast.com/consultations. The astrologers on the list are friends of the podcast that have been featured in different episodes over the years, and they have different specialties such as natal astrology, electional astrology, synastry, rectification, or horary astrology. You can get a 10% discount when you book a consultation with one of the astrologers on our list by using the promo code AstrologyPodcast. The astrology software that we use and recommend here on the podcast is called SolarFire for Windows, which is available for the PC at alabe.com. Use the promo code AP15 to get a 15% discount. For Mac users, we recommend a software program called AstroGold for Mac OS, which is from the creators of SolarFire for PC, and it includes both modern and traditional techniques. You can find out more information at astrogold.io, and you can use the promo code AstroPodcast15 to get a 15% discount. If you'd like to learn more about my approach to astrology, then I'd recommend checking out my book titled Hellenistic Astrology, The Study of Fate and Fortune, where I go over the history, philosophy, and techniques of ancient astrology, taking people from beginner up through intermediate and advanced techniques for reading birth charts. You can get a print copy of the book through Amazon or other online retailers, or there's an ebook version available through Google Books. I also recently published a new translation of the anthology of the 2nd century astrologer Vedius Valens, which is one of the most important sources for understanding the practice of ancient astrology. You can find that by searching for Vedius Valens, the anthology, on Amazon or other online book retailers. If you're really looking to expand your studies of astrology, then I would recommend my Hellenistic Astrology course, which is an online course on ancient astrology where I take people through basic concepts up through intermediate and advanced techniques for reading birth charts. There's over 100 hours of video lectures as well as guided readings of ancient texts, and by the time you finish the course, you will have a strong foundation in how to read birth charts, as well as make predictions. You can find out more information at courses.theastrologyschool.com. I also recently launched a new course there called the Birth Time Rectification course, where I teach students how to figure out your birth time using astrology when the birth time is either unknown or uncertain. You can find out more information about that at theastrologyschool.com. Each year, the podcast releases a set of astrology calendar posters for the coming year, and we've just released our 2023 planetary alignments and planetary movements posters, which are now available on our website at theastrologypodcast.com/store. There you can also pick up our 2023 electional astrology report, where Lisa Scheim and I went through the next 12 months, and we picked out the single most auspicious date for each month using the principles of electional astrology. You can get that at theastrologypodcast.com/2023 report. And finally, thanks to our sponsors, including the Mountain Astrologer magazine, which is a quarterly astrology magazine which you can read in print or online at mountainastrologer.com. Finally, thanks also to the Northwest Astrology Conference, which is happening May 25th through the 29th, 2023, just outside of Seattle. This year's conference is going to be a hybrid conference where you can either attend online or in person. Find out more information at norwac.net.